I didn't really get a chance to introduce Cammy properly earlier because of that impromptu rendition, but I was going to say when it came to this point before the Immortal Memory that I've known Cammy since we both served with the Black Watch many years ago. We first met when the Black Watch was stationed in Hong Kong. We arrived in Hong Kong, if I remember rightly, in January 1993, and that was very shortly before the first Burns season. And there were two major Burns suppers in the Black Watch. One was the Corporal's Mess Burns supper, and one was the Sergeant's Mess. They were on, if I remember, consecutive weekends, and they invariably started on a Friday evening and finished somewhere about Sunday afternoon. There were two officers who were allowed to darken the door of these Burns suppers. One was the commanding officer, and the other was the chaplain. And so for a newly posted chaplain to the regiment, it was something of a baptism of fire to experience these extraordinary Burns suppers, which always included the entire Corporal's Mess or Sergeant's Mess coming to church on the Sunday morning. And I remember carefully laying out packets of polo mints at the end of every pew before the Corporal's Mess or Sergeant's Mess arrived. But Cammy and I have shared many a platform one way or another since then. We've been good friends ever since, and it's been a particular pleasure to welcome him here as our unexpected recitalist tonight, but now as our anticipated deliverer of the Immortal Memory to Robert Burns. Cammy.
Thank you very much, Neil. A wee trip down memory lane for me there. He's almost entirely correct about these Burns supper weekends. The Sergeant's Mess Burns weekend actually began on the Thursday evening with a games night, which would invariably go on until about 3 o'clock in the morning, and then you had to trap for work the next day, work the whole day, then do the Burns supper at night, which usually would finish around about 12:30 lunchtime on the Saturday, and and then we would have a ladies' evening, very politically, on the Saturday evening, which would normally go through until about 5:30, 6 o'clock or so, and then, as Neil says, Kirk parade the next morning. So those polo mints were greatly sought after, I can tell you. That was followed by a curried lunch back in the Sergeant's Mess, which would frankly go on until about sort of 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening. So all in all, a fairly kind of heavy weekend. Well, as it happens, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not looking for any kind of pity, but this is true. I laid a friend in the ground this afternoon, out in Falkirk, dear friend of mine, and I thought, just in his memory, I would start with one of his jokes. Because he was a great wordsmith. Fornication such as this I decided that I would dress in my regimental tartan. This is not Black Watch. I can see that you would think that this is Black Watch from everything that Neil's saying. The Black Watch tartan is in fact government tartan number 1. And the tartan that I stand before you in is the prosaically entitled Government Tartan number 1 Alpha. Which is indeed the regimental tartan of the Royal Regiment of Scotland, which was the last regiment in which I served. And being as how I was a quartermaster sergeant, I could tell you the niceties, the differences between government tartan number 1 and number 1 Alpha, and the difference is that the green pops a little more than this one. Bit more vibrant, brings out my eyes. So I thought I would go with that. Now, I start off Immortal Memories with no real clear idea of where I'm going to go, and perhaps it may turn out a sang, perhaps turn out a sermon, but I'll tell you, serving in the Black Watch, I had times when I was very much in need of a chaplain. As Burns wrote to his friend Andrew Aiken, he said, when in life you're tempest-driven a conscience but a canker, a correspondence linked with heaven, is share a noble anchor. That's in his epistle to a young friend, which is a wonderful work of art. And one that my father said to me when I was out in Berlin, when I just first joined the regiment, and there was pieces of advice in there that I just thought were sterling, and I've held on to them for the rest of my life. And Burns is very like that. You know, if you're looking for an answer for what ails you, the chances are you're to find it within Burns's work. It's odd that most countries will have a great poet, they'll have a great songwriter, they'll have someone who collects all their melodies, they'll have someone who says everything wise that there is to be said in their mother tongue. Here in Scotland, it's very singular that we have one guy doing all of that, doing quadruple service, if you will. He really is a mercurial individual. But I thought that since I was here, I recall the last time I was here, Neil asked me if I would give him the epistle to William Simpson of Ochiltree, for the specific reason that it mentions Ferguson, the writer chiel a deathless fame. Oh, Ferguson, thy glorious perts ill suited laws dry musty airts. A curse upon your Whinstein herts, your Edinburgh gentry. The tithe of what you wasted cares would stoud his pantry. It's really just a small snippet. It's the only bit that really references Ferguson. And I think that was really the main reason for being asked to do the poem. But what I've never heard anyone else do is the postscript to that poem. I've literally never heard anyone else do it. And I think that it's wonderful because, in this poem, he's going on to William Simpson of Ochiltree about the differences between the old licht and the new licht within the Kirk of Scotland. And the fact that he's had to write to William Simpson to tell him the difference between the old licht and the new licht suggests to me Willie Simpson actually being a reasonably good poet, very erudite. He was a schoolmaster himself, in actual fact. It seems to me that it's possible that Burns actually coined the phrase new licht and old licht. I'll need to look into that. I'm not entirely certain about the scholarship behind that, but I think it's possible that he coined the phrase. Certainly the poem that made him famous in Ayrshire as a rhymer was his Twa Herds, the Holy Tulgey, in which he's talking about Alexander Moody of Rickerton and Black Jock Russell of the High Kirk of Kilmarnock, who were two of the staunchest voices for the old licht in Ayrshire at the time, and they got into something of a quarrel with each other over their parish boundaries. You know, this is a period in time, ladies and gentlemen, where your preachers were your rock stars. The Holy Fair reads something like Live Aid with preaching. It's a wonderful work of art. And he talks about various different preachers, and I'm going to introduce each of them to you. And one of them is this Alexander Moody that I was telling you about. The other one, Black Jock Russell. And they're sandwiched in between one or two other preachers. But now the congregation are silent expectation. For Moody spells the holy door with tidings of damnation should harm me. As in ancient days, mang sins a God present him, the very sicht a Moody's face to his own het hame had sent him with fricht that day. Hear how he clears the points of faith with rattling and with thumping. Now mildly meek, now wild and wrath, he's stamping and he's jumping. He's upturned stout, he's lengthened chin, his eldritch squeals and gestures. Oh, how they fire the hearts devout, like Carthaginian plaisters on sick a day. But hark, the tent has changed its voice. There's peace and rest no longer. For all the real judges rise, oh, they can't sit for anger. Smith opens up his cold harangues, oh, practice and oh, morals. And off the godly pouring thrangs to give the jars and barrels a lift that day. What signifies his barren shine, oh, moral powers and reason, his English style and gesture fine, are all clean out of season. Like Socrates or Antonine or some old pagan heathen, the moral man he does define, but ne'er a word o' faith in that's richt that day. In good time comes the antidote against sic puissant nostrum, for Peebles, for the water fit, ascends the holy rostrum. See up, he's got the word of God, and meek and mummy's viewed it, well, common sense has ta'en the road, and off and up the Cowgate fast that day. Wee Miller neist, the Gerd relieves it, and orthodoxy rebels, though in his heart he well believes and thinks it old wife's fables, but faith, the Billy wants a manse. So carnally hums him, although his carnal wit and sense, like Hoffins, overcomes him at times that day. And then there's a wee interpolation in between there, one or two other verses, and then he introduces the real star of the show. But hark! The Lord's ain trumpet touts, till all the hills are rearing and echoes back, resound the shouts, Black Russell isn't sparing, his piercing words like healing swords, divide the joints and marrow, his talk o' hell, where devils dwell, their very souls does harrow with fricht that day, a vast, unbottomed, boundless pit, filled full of lowing brimstone waves, rage and flame and searing heat, would melt the hardest whinstone, the half asleep start up with fear and think they hear it roaring. Till presently it does appear 'twas just some neighbour snoring, asleep that day. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that a wonderful picture? And you see, what's strange about it is that Burns himself was very much of the moderate wing. And yet there, he seems to show far more affinity, perhaps, for the old licht preachers than he does for the moral powers and gesture fine of George Smith of Goston. And the reason for this, you know, it's a cultural reason. In Ayrshire, in the 18th century, there was very little to do. Very little to do. It goes without saying that we had no Netflix. You know, we had no PlayStation. But neither had we theatre. Neither had we sporting occasions. Neither had we, to great intents and purposes, newspapers. Very few newspapers around. The Kirk was very much your entertainment for the week. That was it. That was all you had to choose from. And if you've got to make the choice for your one showing of the week between a psychological thriller and something dry and learned from the Open University, then there's every possibility that you and I would all choose to go down the psychological thriller route. Undoubtedly, but it runs deeper than that, ladies and gentlemen. Because the old licht Kirk was all about patronage. Now, Neil told me a story at one stage, and I'm not sure whether this is entirely apocryphal or not, but he told me of being, when he was called to ministry in this particular parish, and he had to appear before the Kirk session, and then disappeared across the Starbucks across the road to see whether his candidature was met with approval or not. And he sat there in great trepidation with his half-fat, no-foam caramel macchiato, wondering whether or not he would gain the sinecure. And luckily he did, of course. But this speaks to the heart of what the Scottish Reformation, essentially, ladies and gentlemen, is all about. The other part of the moderate wing, the new lichts, if you will, is the Enlightenment ideal in the enlightened despot. You know, the individual who was going to act on everyone's best interests. And so it was up to the gentry, the country gentry, to decide under the new light who the minister for the parish is going to be. And this is an issue, very much an issue, when you have no access to any kind of media. And what you hear from the pulpit is literally gospel truth. And it certainly went against the grain for a lot of people in Ayrshire to necessarily expect the gentry to have put someone into place in the pulpit who was going to have the interests of the poor at hand. Burns is sometimes painted as something of a radical, and I think it's not something that you can mistake in his makeup with things like "is there for honest poverty," and man was made to mourn. The wonderful verse in "Man was made to mourn," possibly the verse that's most, there's a line from it which is probably the best known. Many and sharp the numerous ills, and woven in our frame, mere pointed still we mark ourselves, regret, remorse, and shame. And man whose heaven-erected face the smiles of love adorn, man's inhumanity to man makes countless thousands mourn. See yonder poor o'erlaboured wight, say abject, mean and vile, what begs his brother of the earth to gie him leave to toil, and see his lordly fellow worm his poor petition spurn, uncaring though a weeping wife and helpless offspring born. If I'm designed yon lordling slave, by nature's law designed, why was an independent thought ere planted in my mind? If not, why am I subject to his cruelty and scorn? And why has man the wit and power to make his brother mourn? It's a wonderful sentiment. And I think something that's frequently missed, we are aware that Burns died at a young age. We're aware that Burns died at the age of 37. I've been doing this quite a long time. It doesn't happen to me so much now, but 10 years ago or so, people would come up to me and say, "You know, a little bit too young for doing this." And I had to say to them, if Burns was stood here at my age, he'd been dead 2 years. It's a remarkable thing. But he didn't write that at the age of 37. He wrote that particular song at the age of 25. 25. And much of what he writes, which is incredible clarity of vision of the human condition, he's doing before the age of 30. From 30 onwards, he devotes almost his entire life to song. And the main reason for that is that the people in Edinburgh, the intelligentsia in Edinburgh, have told him that he should leave that parochial tongue behind and try and write in English, that he will win a far greater audience that way. But he said that his ideas were far more barren than the English tongue. And there's a reason for that, because there's a brevity available to you in the Scottish language which does not exist in the English tongue. It certainly did not exist in the English tongue of the 18th century. You couldn't say couldn't in 18th century English. And if you can't say can't, then you need an extra syllable. If you need an extra syllable, it makes it less fit for poetry. There's a very good reason for him writing in Scots. Very good reason for him writing in Scots. But that would be espoused, of course, by the earlier Romantic poets. They would use their own dialectical versions of English, and they would learn how to make use of English. And the reason that English really is the lingua franca in popular culture today is because we allow great depredations in our language. We can understand someone speaking Jaffakin. We can understand, we perhaps don't want to, but we can understand rap if we listen to it. You can't do that in French. You can't do that in La Belle Longue. If you listen to a song which has been translated out of English into another European dialect, usually they've had to add on syllables just to make it make sense. We have the economy that we have in the language, in large part, down to Burns. It's a remarkable thing, ladies and gentlemen. And he's a remarkable individual. And that's why we meet annually to toast his memory. And so I would ask you to charge your glasses if you've not already done so. And drink with me a toast to the immortal memory of Robert Burns.